Hi, everyone. Today we're going to review the core element of leadership within the ecosystem. Leadership is one of the 7 core elements of an organizational ecosystem, whether it be on the micro or the macro level. And what you need to focus on with this discussion, 3 elements: evolution, alignment, and orchestration. The ecosystem evolves, and the leader must drive that evolution. And that evolution is change, and change is an action process. The leader has to drive change, specifically has to drive change toward adaptation, whatever that may be. That's evolution. The leader must drive it, or the leader will succumb to whatever evolution or change occurs within that ecosystem. Second, we have alignment. And the leader is accountable to ensure that all the core elements align with one another. And I want you to think of alignment as support. They have to support one another. We talked about how the core element of values is the foundation. Leadership is part of that foundation. Why? Evolution, alignment. And the third is orchestration, where alignment is all about the core elements supporting one another. Orchestration is a little different. Orchestration is where the leader has to ensure that all of the core elements work together. Work now is highly distributed. There's a lot of moving parts. Not only must the core elements of the ecosystem support one another, be aligned with one another, but the leader has to ensure that they have to work together. In order to do that, the leader must create relationships and use something that we call humble inquiry. But we'll talk a little bit more about the specifics to those 3 aspects in a bit. But let's take a look at our lecture notes. And from the top, you can see, like it or not, the ecosystem evolves and regenerates. Absolutely true. Absolutely true. And the leader has to drive that change. You cannot accept the status quo. And we've talked about that. Second, effective organizational performance requires the alignment of strategy and leadership practices and ecosystem core elements. Always remember the dynamic: vision drives strategy, strategy drives execution. Without execution, your strategy is non-existent, your vision is non-existent. Effective organizational performance requires that the core elements are aligned to ensure that strategy occurs through execution. And the ecosystem and leadership are simply 2 sides of the same coin. That's orchestration. The leader must embody all elements of the ecosystem and must ensure that they work together. And we'll see down here, leadership must adapt as the ecosystem needs to evolve based on the business environment. Hopefully you see that in your own workplace. The leader must drive the evolutionary process, or the ecosystem will drive the leader. And the difficulty with the ecosystem driving the leader is it may not lead to alignment of the core elements, and the leader may be unable to orchestrate those core elements. Think of the evolutionary process as the change process. That simple. Think of it as the leader adapting the ecosystem that he or she can control for the good of the organization. Leadership must always ensure alignment with ecosystem core elements, both at the micro and the macro level. This is complex. This is not always easy. An organization, and we've discussed this before, is just chock full of hundreds, thousands of ecosystems. It's difficult for the leader, who usually wants to create his or her own ecosystem, kind of in their own image, if you will, while he or she has the pressures of the macro ecosystem on them. But alignment is important. Support is important. Not only support of the core elements within the micro ecosystem, but ensuring that those core elements within the micro ecosystem support the core elements in the macro ecosystem. And leadership must orchestrate ecosystem core elements to ensure goals are attained. It's all about execution. It's all about executing on the strategies to ensure that that vision occurs. So here we see the three aspects that we're going to focus on today: evolution, alignment, and orchestration. And we will start with evolution. So like it or not, the ecosystem is going to change. It's going to evolve. It's going to regenerate. It will adapt. The difficulty is the leader must drive that adaptation. The leader must drive that adaptation to ensure continued alignment with the macro ecosystem core elements. That's important. And you'll see leadership must adapt. Leadership has to drive the ecosystem. So the ecosystem of an organization, whether it's micro or macro, can now be defined. It's a pattern of shared basic assumptions that the organization has learned and has learned over time. So think of it that way. And it has learned as it has solved problems of external adaptation and internal integration. It has learned that has worked well enough to be considered valid and therefore to be taught to new members as a correct way to perceive, think, or feel in relation to those problems. The ecosystem is constantly morphing based upon the experiences of those within it. It's up to the leader to drive the correct experiences. Why? Because we learn from those experiences and we apply them moving forward. That becomes part of the new ecosystem. This is important. In other words, when taking action, facing both internal and external forces, we use a set of behaviors. And if our action is successful, we consider those behaviors used to be valid and teachable. The ecosystem evolves as these values become part of the new evolved ecosystem. This is what evolution is about within the ecosystem, and therefore it's up to the leader to ensure that we use the right set of behaviors, of actions, aligned with our values and visions to keep the evolutionary process on or in the right direction. So, evolution. As the organization evolves, so too does its ecosystem, shaped by the actions of leadership. But over time, the ecosystem is going to face two basic challenges: integrating individuals into the effective whole, adapting effectively to the external environment to create organizational benefits. So the ecosystem continues to move forward, but it's being injected with new individuals. They're bringing to the ecosystem their own experiences, their own ways of going about things. Meanwhile, the external environment or the macro ecosystems are putting pressure on the micro ecosystem. Major challenges. It's up to the leader to be effective in the new individuals that he or she brings to the ecosystem. And it's up to the new leader to ensure that the micro ecosystem adapts to the external pressures that it may experience from the macro ecosystem. And then, as solutions to problems are found over time, the organization engages in a kind of collective learning that creates a set of shared assumptions and beliefs that we know as the new ecosystem, the evolved ecosystem. The HR department that I inherited at Burn Dairy, totally different than the HR department that I left at Burn Dairy. Burn Dairy had evolved over the 8.5 years I was there. From something as small as new equipment and new facilities, but we were always injecting and bringing in new people, new talent, to something as large as when I started, there were no females in any leadership position. And we immediately set about in bringing in female leaders, not only at the plant level, but also at the corporate level, bringing in a female leader that we actually recruited from Ben & Jerry's to head up our quality group and our research and development group, and another female leader to head up our marketing group. So the evolution occurred, but it occurred because leadership drove it, and that's what's important. So like it or not, ecosystem evolution matters because it can't be stopped. It's always going forward. And how the leader should always view it is by asking himself or herself some questions, and I have them here. How effective would your organization be in a completely different external market? And we found at Burn Dairy when I started would not be effective. We needed to have diversity of thought, and we made that change. The second question, does the leader know how to lead effectively to work within a different ecosystem? So as we brought new people in, we wanted those individuals to be able to work not only in the current ecosystem, but where we were also taking the company, that they had the ability to adapt and do that. And third, how can you effectively prepare people for working within a different ecosystem? You do that through education. You do that by establishing a series of experiences where they take what they've learned, they take how they've solved problems, and they bring that forward, again, helping you, the leader, to morph the ecosystem. Now, what's important is smoothing the evolutionary process. In smoothing the evolutionary process, the leader really needs to do three things. Learn to determine those issues that are most important, what the leader needs to focus on. Again, making sure that that's aligned with the vision and values and the strategic plan. Number two, realize that issues and human behaviors can quickly transform into crises if they're not dealt with adequately. Not only adequately, but quickly. And understand the longer an issue survives, the fewer choices are available and the more it costs. While early action allows for flexible, adaptive, and creative thinking. So number three is all about being proactive and not reactive. And there were many cases at Burn Dairy where we opted not to reach out and purchase a new piece of equipment, that we continued to do it in a fashion that was costly. And before you know it, the costs just piled up and it affected our place in the market. There were a couple of occasions where some products that we developed just were not profitable and just were so overpriced that we dropped out of the market. If we had purchased that piece of equipment, it would have made us more efficient, more effective, more cost effective, and we could have been a larger player in the market. These are decisions, unfortunately, that have to be made. And you'll see at the bottom line for leaders is that if they do not become conscious of the process, that evolutionary process, that process of adaptation in which they are embedded, the ecosystem will manage them instead of the other way around. And that is where leaders will fail. Our next focus is on alignment. And alignment is support, where the core elements must support each other. And it's the responsibility, it's the accountability of the leader to ensure alignment. So you'll see at the top, once an organization has defined a business mission, ecosystem core elements must be aligned, which most appropriately reinforce those business objectives. And this alignment must filter down to all levels and projects. So not only must it occur at the macro level, it has to occur at the micro level. It is a requirement of leadership within the organization to build a supportive, a unifying culture, a unifying ecosystem that supports the achievement of business goals. That is the leader's responsibility. That is what he or she must do. So what is alignment? How do we define it? Ecosystem core elements must, 3 items, reflect how we do things around here in order to succeed. Must reflect the organization's way, its identity, pattern of dynamic relationships, reality, and must have everything to do with implementation and how success is achieved. That's alignment. But keep in mind, specifically, with these 3 items, that evolution will change those. So how we do things today in order to succeed is going to be different than how we do them tomorrow. That goes back to the evolutionary process. But regardless of where you are in that moment of time, the core elements have to support each other to ensure success. And you'll see here, no management idea, no matter how good, will work in practice, implementation, if it does not fit the ecosystem. Again, vision, wonderful. Strategy, great. Execution, difficult. Execution is implementation. You need all 3 to be working. An organization can have the most superb strategy, but if its ecosystem is not aligned with and supportive of that strategy, the strategy will either stall or fail. At Byrne, when we built the culture plant, the yogurt plant, if we did not bring in the expertise, the new talent, if we did not inject those new individuals into our ecosystem that had experience in the manufacture of cultured dairy products, the plant would have failed. Now the plant still struggles. It's a tough market. Dairy is a tough business, but it would have struggled terribly, immensely. We would have lost our first new customers. And in fact, there were probably 2 individuals that we brought in that, even though had experience, brought with them what I would call baggage. Elements of experience that were not positive in terms of what we were looking for in our ecosystem at that plant. And unfortunately, sometimes it doesn't work out when it comes to human resources. So it's very important. We needed experience. In some cases, the new experience didn't align with our ecosystem, but in most cases, it did. The ecosystem establishes and underpins, and I won't read through all of this, but again, you're going to see a lot of these phrases, these items reflect the other core elements. Now, how does leadership ensure alignment? And we really look at these items. In looking to one or four mechanisms, the leader must always understand the direction of the organizational goals, their ultimate direction, where they're headed. So when it comes to alignment, when it comes to ensuring that the core elements support one another, there are four mechanisms that the leader can employ, one or more. You'll see them here: control, collaboration, competence, cultivation. And we'll take them one by one. Control is simply this, that the leader must ensure that the ecosystem is all about certainty. It fundamentally exists to ensure certainty, predictability, safety, accuracy, dependability. The leader must ensure all of that. And in order to do that, the leader has to focus on organizational goal attainment. The leader has to ensure that there is certainty. And the leader does that by establishing metrics and measuring those metrics and reporting on them. So you'll see accordingly, the design and framework for information and knowledge in the ecosystem is essentially built around goals of the organization. And again, when you have goals, you have to measure them. Next, we have collaboration. Here, the ecosystem is all about synergy. It fundamentally exists to ensure unity, connection with the customer, and an intense dedication to the customer. In order to ensure or use this mechanism, the leader focuses on knowledge attainment. Now, collaboration, or the focus on the customer, or trying to connect elements of the ecosystem to the customer, can be difficult. If you take a organization with a lot of moving parts, and burned area is one of them on the manufacturing side, it's difficult for an employee to connect to a customer. You can have an employee who's working a filling machine where the milk is actually being filled into a bottle, a jug, or a carton, and a label is being put on it. You would think that you would want that employee to view the customer as the retailer or the person who buys the product and takes it home. This would be flawed thinking in terms of collaboration. You would have that filler operator think of the customer in terms of who is next down the value stream line. When the cartons, the bottles, or the jugs come off the line, they go into the cooler. Another set of hands, another set of eyes now are looking at that product. They're looking to make sure that the caps are on, that the cartons or the jugs or the bottles are clean, the labels are on appropriately, and then they have to make sure that it's the right product to put on the truck to go to the retailer. So the filler operator, their customer, their focus is on the next employee downstream, the cooler person. And then the cooler person, their customer, is the driver. So what's important for the leader is to ensure that there is knowledge attainment about the core elements of the ecosystem for all the individuals in that value stream. And that is knowledge attainment. Competence. The ecosystem is all about distinction. It fundamentally exists to ensure the accomplishment of unparalleled, unmatched products or services. That's the intent, at least. This is the ecosystem of uniqueness, of one-of-a-kind products or services, and the requirement of distinct competence. This means the fundamental issue in a competence culture or ecosystem is the realization of conceptual goals, superior goals, distinctive conceptual goals or competence. Here the leader focuses the ecosystem around the distinctive conceptual system goals of the organization and the extent to which those goals are met. Think of competence again, great example, building that cultured dairy plant. Bringing in folks who have that specific expertise, that specific competence. And then we have cultivation. Here the ecosystem is all about enrichment. It fundamentally exists to ensure the fullest growth of the customer, fulfilling the customer's potential, raising up the customer. And this means that the fundamental issue is a connection between the values and ideals of the organization and the extent to which those values and ideals are being operationalized. Here, the leader focuses the ecosystem on value-centered goal attainment. Cultivation means growing individuals, moving them up within the organization based upon their actions, their behaviors, based upon their values that should be aligned with the organization. So when we talk about the alignment of the ecosystem core elements, the leader is going to use 4 mechanisms: control, collaboration, competence, cultivation. Lastly, in our discussion, we're going to talk about orchestration. And as I said initially, orchestration is the leader ensuring, the leader being responsible, being accountable to ensure that the core elements work together. Alignment is that they're supporting each other. Orchestration is that they're working together. And you'll see, leadership must orchestrate. Now, this course is at the graduate level, and you have had business courses at the undergrad level. I don't know the details necessarily of the undergrad courses that you've taken or how those courses have dealt with the topic of leadership. And of course, if you've taken my courses, you are familiar with how I view the topic of leadership. There's a lot of theories on leadership. Probably the current most popular theory is of servant leadership. Unification theory is my favorite, and that is where the leader is a conductor of an orchestra, where he or she is weaving all the various elements together to ensure goals are met. And that's kind of what we're talking about here. And you'll see the leader must orchestrate. 90% of what a person does in the workplace, how they act and behave, is driven by ecosystem rules, not personality. So the leader establishes those rules within the core elements. He or she establishes the actions and behaviors that are necessary to meet the vision, the values that are necessary to execute the strategies. The leader must orchestrate all of that. And the leader must understand the ecosystem. Is not the surface phenomenon that it simply just doesn't happen. The leader has to make things happen. It stems from core elements. That employees live in the ecosystem, that they display the core elements as they understand them, and that they are always driven by those ecosystem core elements. The leader must have the understanding of these four items. By having that understanding, the leader now recognizes that he or she has to orchestrate. The genesis of the ecosystem, the leader. And I'm going to read this aloud because I think it's important. When organizations start or when groups start, there is always a leader who has a preferred way of doing things. And those preferences, by definition, are going to be imposed on group members. Number one, makes sense. Happens all around. You've experienced that in your workplace. The leader's values, the leader's preferences are the first ways that a group or organization does things. And if that works, it becomes eventually the ecosystem of that group. So in a very real sense, founders and leaders create culture. They create the ecosystem. In an established organization, one that's been around for many, many years, the way in which they have always done things limits what a leader can do, even what defines a leader in that organization. A leader cannot just walk in and do things their way. The system will not allow it. All of this is true. Many of you have probably experienced that. But keep in mind, it's still up to the leader to bring the ecosystem forward, to adapt the ecosystem to new and different ways. And you'll see the example there when Carly Fiorina started at HP. She really upset a lot of folks because she was very flamboyant. She wanted to do some expensive things, spend a lot of money, and that limited the amount that she could do as a leader. She really received a lot of pushback. The execution part of that dynamic, right? The dynamic of vision, strategy, execution. The execution part became difficult. Nice vision, nice strategy, couldn't get through the execution because of what we've discussed. So the ecosystem can constrain leadership in a mature company, just as leaders create the ecosystem in a young startup company. At the end of it all, though, in order to reshape the existing ecosystem, the leader has to focus on solving business problems and therefore reinforce the behaviors that come from those problems, and in doing so, help reshape the ecosystem through new experiences, through new ways of doing things. To orchestrate this dynamic, two aspects: humble inquiry and orchestration itself. You'll see humble inquiry, and if you've not heard of this phrase, it is something that is very important, and especially if you are currently a leader or aspire to be one, you'll want to use humble inquiry. So humble inquiry, right from the start, as you can see, is creating a climate in which the leader displays, through asking genuine questions, authentic questions, an interest in the other person. Why is this important? Well, as you'll see here, because in most organizations, the macro communication infrastructure related to upward communication is faulty. Individuals want to have a voice and they want to be heard. Humble inquiry helps promote that. Many employees know a lot of things that can make the organization more effective, more efficient, but they usually keep that information to themselves. Why? The leader shoots the messenger. The leader rarely takes interest in it, or the leader never truly fixes anything, and therefore the employees thinks that there's just little incentive to share the information. Humble inquiry stops all of that from occurring. Humble inquiry helps the leader to orchestrate. And you'll see the resolution to all of this. The leader must change their behavior to go to the employee and engage in humble inquiry. And you'll see the example. I'm really interested in what you see and how we can be better and what we should not be doing. And I'm listening. We can set a plan and try to see how it can work together. Now, if a leader can't do that, if a leader is not going to bring humble inquiry, the leader is going to have difficulty in orchestration. The leader is going to have difficulty in ensuring that all these core elements are working together. The reason why is the primary driver of all the core elements is the human element. Next, orchestrate. You'll see the first bullet point. Work now is a highly distributed process. There's a lot of moving parts in organizations. A lot of things have to play together for the product or the service to hit the market. So it's no longer a case of where the manager can tell you or can tell what to do. A lot of people have to be involved. The leader cannot be everywhere. So part of orchestration is the leader ensuring that all these gears within the organization, micro and macro, are working together. And that means ensuring that there's competence and proficiency throughout the organization. Of course, and that gets back to our previous discussions on alignment and evolution. So evolution, alignment, and orchestration all play together. The manager must orchestrate all core elements within the micro and the micro to macro, create relationships, and make sure everything works together. It's doubtful that an organization of any size can have different micro ecosystems within the macro ecosystem where they do not work well together or are aligned. In time, they just will not survive. Now, the difficulty with the leader as someone who can orchestrate is that most leaders prefer being a boss rather than the orchestrator. And that is something that has to change, and only the leader can change that. And hopefully through humble inquiry, that will change. And hopefully through ensuring that there is alignment, that will change. But what is the resolution? The resolution is understanding what the leader as an orchestrator is. And it's someone who effectively transforms the vision into reality. Someone who can take that vision into strategy, but more importantly, execute on it. It's someone who coordinates on both a micro and macro ecosystem level the proper guidelines for making the vision happen. It's someone who ensures all those core elements are aligned, that they are supporting one another. Specifically, this is done, these 4 bullets. reviewing key metrics, reviewing goal progress, both time and associated metrics, quickly adapting core elements to redirect efforts to goal attainment, and remembering that adaptation is part of the ecosystem evolutionary process. Orchestration is a concept that some folks will have difficulty understanding. It's not that difficult when you really think about it and begin to peel back parts of it. It's not difficult when you look at the 7 core elements and view yourself, the leader, as the person that has to make sure that they not only are aligned and support one another, that not only do I know that it's going to change and morph and move in a direction, I got to make sure it moves in the right direction, but that I need to make sure that all these core elements work together and are in harmony. A perfect example is an automated system, making sure that the right automated system is developed or purchased and implemented, making sure that it is cost effective, making sure that it is efficient, and these days, with most automated systems, making sure that it provides the proper data to the various other functions or ecosystems within an organization. That type of project is a huge leadership orchestration project. Another example is if you're a new leader, you've been brought into an organization, into a department that has had high turnover. You have to take a look at the reasons. You have to begin to fill positions. And now you have to orchestrate folks that I currently have with the new folks. And there's probably going to be some conflicts because, again, the ecosystem is evolving and moving forward. I hope you enjoyed today's lecture review, and I thank you for your time.